Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ashraf Sayed, the Public Relations Director for the Mahdi Youth Society. First of all, we're very honored to have you here. We are in the presence of Shaykh Mahdi Rastani, and today we're going to be talking about a program featured at Don't Judge Me. So this program is about just like the features and like the problems associated with judging people, how it works in the community. And Sheikh Mahdi is just going to provide us some insight into what it really is. So before we get Sheikh Mahdi on, I'd like to briefly introduce him. So Sheikh Mahdi Rastani was born and raised in the US. After finishing high school in the Islamic Republic of Iran, he joined the Islamic Seminary of Qom and completed 6 years of introductory and intermediate studies at Shahidi Islamic Seminary. Afterwards, he continued with the studies for another 4 years under the supervision of a number of teachers studying the works of Sheikh Murtada al-Ansari and great Allama Tabatabai. He then attended advanced classes on jurisprudence taught by Ayatollah Hashemi Sharudi. Sheikh Mahdi has made many trips throughout the US and Europe, lecturing on and conveying Islamic teachings. He is fluent in English, Farsi, and Arabic. He is currently assisting in curriculum development of Wisdom Academy, a Shia Islamic school. He's also an instructor at Mizan Institute and the resident alim in the City of Knowledge in Dallas, Texas. So with that being said, I'd like you all to recite a loud salawat so we can introduce Sheikh Mahdi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa
ala. Thank you very much, Brother Asher. Assalamu alaikum to our beloved brothers and sisters. I hope everyone is doing well. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. I hope everyone is doing well, inshallah, and I hope that these couple of weeks that we've had after the month of Ramadan have been good and beneficial weeks for us, and hopefully we've been able to internalize the spirituality that we gained throughout the month of Ramadan. Special thanks to Mahdi Society or Al-Mahdi Youth Society for having me today. I'm honored to be here and inshallah very glad and excited to discuss a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So inshallah, today's presentation will be going through some slides to discuss this topic of judgment. First, I'll explain why it's so near and dear to my heart and why it's such a topic that I'm so passionate about. And then inshallah, after that, we can actually get into the topic itself. So the reason why I thought that this topic would be a good topic, not just a good topic, but a critical topic to discuss is because usually what we find in our communities, and I've seen this as my personal experience, interacting with the younger generation, is that we normally, one of the main things that stops us from being a part of the community, one of the main things that stops us from really trying to spiritually grow ourselves and hinders that process is the idea that a lot of us feel judged by others, right? And because of that, what happens is that our younger generation a lot of times may not even be able to connect with the community that has been formed around them. And because of that, a lot of times they won't be able to benefit from a lot of the good things that are happening in the community because there are individuals within that community, and sometimes it's within the community, sometimes within their own family, relatives, who the moment they see a flaw from this individual, they will start to judge them. Okay, so this idea of judgment is very, very critical because it plays a role in all of our lives. And as we go through today's topic, I'll discuss that even more and we'll go into more detail about that, inshallah. But this is really why I wanted to choose this topic. And I wanted to present on this topic because it is a topic that is misunderstood by so many. And it is a topic that when it's misunderstood, it creates a lot of problems for us in our communities. And sometimes you'll have a person, young or old, doesn't really matter, but more so, the younger generation is obviously more vulnerable to this, where they can, really shine and they can be really great. But because they feel judged, a lot of times they don't even give themselves that opportunity to be a part of what's happening, to take part in religious gatherings, to be a part of religious practices or rituals, right? And so it's really a problem and something that we have to, spend some time discussing. I always say this, I say there are certain topics that we discuss that are not as fundamental, and then there's certain, topics that we discuss that are extremely fundamental. This is one of those topics that's extremely fundamental. This is one of those things that makes or breaks a community. Okay. Whether a group of people get together and gather around one another and you have, high numbers, 500, 1,000 or not, that's not what necessarily makes a community. A community is formed when people feel like they are around one another and they are not being judged. That's what makes a community. So that's why understanding this topic is so critical and it's so important. So inshallah, if we can move on to the slides, we'll go to the first slide, inshallah, and hopefully that will give us an overview of what we will be discussing today, inshallah. Okay, perfect. So the first slide, of course, is called Don't Judge Me. That's the name that we chose for this presentation because that's the way normally we relate to this topic. A lot of times you'll find when we're discussing different issues or something comes up, someone has done something, they'll tell you what they've done and then they say, don't judge me, right? Maybe what they mean by that is you haven't been in the situation that I was in. Maybe by that they mean that you don't understand fully what they have gone through. So regardless of what they mean, that's how normally we use this phrase, and that's how this idea of judgment really manifests itself. So if we go to the second slide, on the second slide, we will see a list of the questions that we will be discussing today, inshallah. So the first question that we're going to be discussing is this. What does it mean when we say don't judge me? It is very, very critical to actually understand what this phrase means and what it means and what is meant by it, okay? Because unless we mean what it's meant by it, we won't be able to say whether, judging others is a good thing, is it a bad thing? At the end of the day, God judges human beings as well. So can we say it's always bad? So we need to understand what is exactly said by this to then take the next step and understand what is Islam's opinion and take on this issue. Second question is, where does the Quran and Hadith make reference to that concept of judging others? Do we have verses of the Quran, for example, that talk about this? Do we have Hadith that talks about this? That's the second question that we'll have to answer. The third question is, can you ever make a judgment and a call that this person, this individual, that individual, whoever it might be, will never make it into heaven? Okay, is that something that you and I can judge, right? There will be people who will say, yeah, you can make that judgment. There are people who will be saying, no, you can never make that judgment. We'll have to wait and see what Islam really thinks about that. Are there any situations where you can make that judgment or not? Fourth question, does a judgment-free atmosphere mean that I should be sharing everything? So if we do establish that there shouldn't be judgment in a community, does that then mean that if I feel like the people around me are not supposed to judge me, that I should feel free to share everything, right? Every struggle that I have, I bring it to the table and others should not judge me. Is that what Islam is trying to promote? Or is Islam trying to promote something in between the two of these? And we'll talk about this more, that sometimes Islam will push from one side, but at the same time will push from the other side as well. Sometimes Islam will tell you that you are not to judge when you find out something about someone. But at the same time, this doesn't mean that that individual should feel free to share everything that they are going through because they expect others not to judge them. So that's the fourth question that we will talk about. And the fifth, and the one that many of us can probably relate to, is what should I do if I feel like I am being judged? Very, very important question. Very important, a couple of very important points to make there. Because in reality, we all feel judged at one point or another in our life, if you think about it. And I'll share some personal experiences about that as well. But beyond that, what does Islam say when you are feeling judged? What does Islam say that you are supposed to do? Okay, so let's understand the concept of judgment a little bit better. Let's move on to the third slide. Just as an intro to the topic, the concept of judgment is something that is definitely there within not just the religion of Islam, it's there in every religion, right? If you look at any religion, there is at the end of the day some concept of you being judged for the deeds that you have had, one way or another, right? You find this in Christianity, you find it in Judaism, even in Buddhism and Hinduism, right? Buddhism might not be so much of a divine religion per se, but more so of a lifestyle, for example. and Hinduism may not be one religion, might be hundreds of religions put together. Even in those, you find some traces of the concept of judgment, right? Something that we would refer to as karma, or what goes around comes around. And essentially the idea that whatever you do, you're going to be judged at the end of the day. In Islam in particular, judgment has a very critical and important role, right? It's one of the three fundamental beliefs that we have. One of the three pillars of faith that we have is the belief in the day of judgment. And that's why in the verses of the Quran, what you find is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used different names and different titles for the day of judgment. But usually a lot of them have to do with the concept of judgment, right? So Yawm al-Qiyamah is the day that people are raised. Why are they raised? They are raised to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be judged. Yawm al-Fasl, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to the day of judgment with, right? What is Fasl? It's that people are separated from one another, good and the bad, which can't happen unless you judge, right? Yawm al-Hisab, you are held accountable. Again, the meaning of judgment is, built within that word. So judgment is there. Everyone seems to be fine with judgment. The point is, it depends on whether God is doing the judging or whether another human being is doing the judging. That's where things get a little messy, as we say, right? That's where things get a little difficult to understand. Is it God that's doing the judgment? Nobody has a problem with that, because God is just, first of all. Second of all, he has all the knowledge in the world, so his judgment is not going to be off. So no one has a problem with that. Our discussion comes into play when the judge, person who's doing this judgment, is not God, it's a human being. Okay, now is that a problem? That's where our discussion is going to come into play. And that's when people use these a statement like "don't judge me" as a defense for themselves. When they find another human being judging them, that's when they'll say, "You don't have the right to judge me." Right? So that's a difference between these two. Okay. Moving on from that, like we said, we want to understand, the first question that we want to understand is, what is this phrase "don't judge me" even refer to? What is the meaning that is meant by this? Okay, before we actually go into this, because there's three different meanings that I'll talk about today, and you can derive other meanings as well, but three of them I would say are the main meanings that come to mind. Before we do that, I just want to shed light on something very important. So let's move on to the next slide. That important issue, essentially, is that okay, let's move on to the next slide. So we'll come back to this slide, but there we go. Social media and big slogans. So one of the things that we have to pay attention to, living in the society that we live in and living in the time and era that we live in, is that people, a lot of times, they will use these small little quotes, they will use these small little slogans, and you can call them different things. You might call them a slogan, you might call them a motto, you might call them a catchphrase, expression, whatever you want to call them. They're usually like small little sentences that carry a lot of meaning with them. The problem we have, though, is that as concise as these little phrases are, sometimes they can be referring to very different meanings. They can be referring to completely contradictory meanings. But the people who are using these phrases and these quotes, they don't really understand what it's referring to. And therefore, for us living in this society and living in this day and age, whenever we want to use these slogans, whenever we want to use these small little quotes here and there, whether you want to tweet them or you want to put them on on your IG feed, or you want to put them on your IG story, I should say, or on your Facebook, whatever the case is, we really have to understand what is being referred to, and do we really actually agree with what's being said? Because when you have a small quote and it sounds nice, right, that's fine, but then it depends on how the audience is going to understand this and what is meant by this quote. So here are some examples, just so that we understand the time and age that we're in. And I say this because a lot of times we'll use a small little quote. What we understand from it is something. What the audience is going to take away from it, or the meaning that the audience has of that quote in their mind, is something totally different. And sometimes we try to serve Islam or our community, or we're trying to get a message across. What we don't realize is that we're getting the opposite message across. Okay, and there are multiple, a number of examples for this. So here's a first example. you will find people will say you have to always stay true to yourself, right? Or they'll say you have to keep it real. Well, what does that mean, right? It sounds nice, right? If they ask me to tweet that, would I tweet it? Yes, I would tweet it. If they ask me to put that on, like, you ask someone to put that on their wall, for example, right? Would they do that? Yeah, they would do that. But what exactly do we mean by that? Does that mean that if I have a friend who comes to me and tells me, listen, your akhlaq is kind of terrible, or for example, you have no filter, right? You can't hold back. When you know you're not supposed to say something, you still say it. Am I going to sit there and say, well, I have to stay true to myself? I have to keep it real, right? Which some people say, by the way, right? It's a very common misunderstanding that we have, that people think that, being Muslim or being Shia in particular means that you have no filter. Well, that's not correct. Our imams would be very careful about what they said in different situations. That's a whole topic for another time that we could discuss some other time. But what does it mean when you say stay true to yourself, right? If you have certain akhlaq, certain behaviors that are negative, are you going to start to try to eradicate them from your behavior and from your character? Or are you going to sit there and say, no, that's just who I am, right? So we have to understand what we're saying when we use these slogans. The second one is this: living in the moment or living in the now, right? People will use this and they'll say that, you should not worry so much about what's going to happen in the future. You shouldn't worry so much what's going to happen, what has happened in the past. But what does it exactly mean? Does it mean that I'm not supposed to plan for the future? And sometimes when people use this, that's what they're referring to, right? And that's what people walk away with. That, yeah, just live in the moment, take advantage of the moment. And don't worry about the consequences of things. Well, Quran and Hadith say the exact opposite of that a lot of times, right? So again, depending on how you understand this phrase, things are going to be very different. The third one, and this one I usually don't discuss, but this one I'm adding because it just comes with the context that we're living in right now. More so here than you guys, in Toronto, but obviously it's something that the whole world really heard about. All lives matter. Okay, so when we say all lives matter, if someone were to put this quote down, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, right, before all this stuff came to the surface, I should say, um, a lot of people will be like, yeah, all lives matter. In fact, if at that time, if you said no, all lives don't matter, you would sound racist then, right? Because now you're excluding certain races, right? You're saying no, it's not true that all lives matter, right? Now, when you use that same quote, that same line, because of the context that it has and that we all know why this phrase is being used and what is meant by it when it is used, then you find it's a completely different understanding. Now, when you say that, right, there's a chance that you might be amongst those who's trying to diminish, the pain of a certain community and a certain race, right? You're trying to erase an issue that's very, very real. Okay, so you see that one line, you see how the meaning can be starkly different. So it's important that whenever we come across these slogans, whenever we come across these mottos, these one-liners, as we say, we have to really understand what's being said. Otherwise, just putting them out there without really dissecting what they mean, a lot of times will harm us more than they will help us. Okay, so same thing with don't judge me. Now let's go back to the previous slide because I just want to explain this real quick before we go into the meanings that we have in mind. Particularly when it comes to don't judge me and judgment, the reason why it's so important to understand this and to be able to dissect this topic is this. The problem with judgment is this, that when someone is judged, the story doesn't end there. It's not like that's the end. No, when someone is judged, then there is something else that is created. It starts this whole cycle. That thing that is created is what we call shame, right? I'm going clockwise on the slide. So when someone is judged, that leads to something that we call shame, right? If I walk into a gathering, and let's say because of my religious appearance, for example, right? I walk into a gathering and I feel judged. Then the second thing that happens inside of me, the moment I'm judged, is that I have this shame that I have inside of me. What that leads to is that when I go into that gathering, I feel that shame, I isolate myself, right? I don't feel like I can connect. So that there comes a third part in that cycle. It leads to isolation. Okay, I feel isolated. I can't connect with other people. Then from there, it moves on to when I'm isolated, whatever this struggle was that I was having, it is exacerbated. Exacerbation is just a fancy way of saying that things get even worse, right? Now take other examples and just apply it so we understand how this judgment works and how, how terrible it can be, what terrible of a role it can play in someone's life. That they go from, first they're judged, then they have a feeling of shame. That shame essentially keeps them back and holds them back from sharing with others. It holds them back from connecting with others. And when they feel isolated, then Shaitan feels like he has all of the power in the world, and this person is on his own or on her own, which leads to the problem being exacerbated or the problem getting even worse and worse. If I'm struggling with a habit that I'm trying to get rid of, right? If I feel like I'm going to be judged, that will lead to shame. And if I have that shame in my heart, I'm not going to connect with anybody. I'm going to feel isolated. And the moment I feel isolated, Shaitan is going to sit back and have a smile on his face and say, you know what? I have him on his own. You guys have seen sometimes in clips where cheetahs, they're like attacking, a pack of zebras, for example, right? What do? They isolate one. They isolate a weaker one. They isolate one that can't connect with the rest. And when that happens, we all know how that ends, right? Normally, at least. So that's the problem with judgment, and that's why it is so critical to be able to discuss this and understand the whole topic and what is Islam's opinion in this regard. Okay, moving on. Let's move on to slide number 6. Okay, so when we say don't judge me, what is it that we are actually referring to? There are 3 meanings that I'm going to go through, and then we'll have to see what Islam says about each of these 3 different meanings. Sometimes when someone says, don't judge me, what they mean is, listen, whatever I do is my business, okay? So it doesn't matter if I kill a person, if I disrespect somebody, if I don't pray or fast, doesn't matter what I do. You do not have the right to have any moral opinion about what I'm doing. You can't sit there and say what this person did is right or wrong. You can't sit there and say the fact that I disrespected this person is morally right or wrong. You can have no moral opinion about what I'm saying. Okay. So that means like if I do something wrong, you can't even sit there and, kind of like turn your face away in disappointment, because that means you're making a moral judgment. Okay. That's the first opinion. Have no opinion at all about what is happening around you. The second opinion is this, that when people say don't judge me, what they really mean is, listen, you can judge my deeds. You can say that like the fact that I stole money is bad, but you can't take that to judge my whole character, right? If I don't pray, you can say that not praying is not a good idea. God doesn't want that. But then you cannot take that and extend that to say that my character holds no value in the eyes of God, that God doesn't like me, that God doesn't love me, that I'm an evil person. See, this is a whole new level now. So the second opinion is, judge my deeds, that's fine, but don't make a judgment about my whole character as a whole. Okay, moving on, the third, and each one of these we'll have to see, of course, from an Islamic perspective, what is Islam's opinion? The third is this, listen, you can have an opinion, right? And you can judge me as much as you want. Just don't speak to me from a moral high horse. What does that mean? Don't speak to me that in a way that gives off the vibe that, listen, I'm a horrible person and you've never done anything wrong in your life yourself. Okay, these are 3 different meanings, right? And you find that they're very different. So what exactly do we mean when we say don't judge me? See, going back to the point that we were making, this quote is a quote that needs to be dissected properly. Okay, so does Islam tell us that we're not supposed to have any moral opinion about what people do around us? So let's go to the next slide. What does Islam say in this regard? The funny thing is, in Islam, obviously this is not an opinion that we agree on. In Islam, not only is it impossible to not have a moral opinion about what the people around you do, it's impossible. But beyond that, it is obligatory to have that opinion. Or to put it in better terms, it is obligatory for you to acknowledge that judgment that you are making. Not a judgment on their character, we'll get to that later. Judgment on their deeds and their actions. Big stark difference, and I want to make sure that you walk away with this today. There's a big difference between making a judgment on someone's deed as opposed to making a judgment on their character as a whole. Right now, what we're talking about is making a judgment on their deed. Okay, does Islam say I can make a moral judgment like that? Islam says if you don't make a moral judgment like that, you're not even Muslim. Okay? It is inevitable to make a judgment like that. What do I mean by that? Islam fundamentally is a framework of moral teachings. That's what Islam is. Islam is there to tell us what is moral and what is not moral. Now, you might say, well, there are moral teachings that we know of, like being kind is a good thing to do from a moral perspective, whether you're Muslim or you're not Muslim, whether you had Islam in your life or you didn't have Islam in your life. Yes, that's true. So there are certain things that we all agree on that they're moral to do. There are certain things that we all agree on that they are immoral to do, correct? But the reality is that there are a whole bunch of other things that we don't know if they are supposed to be considered moral or immoral, right? Islam says, for example, that when you don't pray, right, that is something immoral. Now you might say, well, if I go around in the world and I ask people and I ask them, is not praying immoral? Half of them might say yes, half of them might say no, half of them might say you're crazy. But that's the whole point. That's why you need Islam in your life. Because Islam is there to fill in our moral gaps, right? We have a moral compass, but this moral compass is very weak. It only tells us certain things. Like it only tells us, like, if you put your knee on the neck of another human being and that human being suffocates to death, right? That's a horrible thing to do. Islam, our moral compass tells us that as a human being. But what about the other things, right? What about name calling? What about other things? That's the part where Islam comes into the picture to complete the moral picture that we have of this world. Okay? That's why you need Islam. Because if we made a list right now in terms of the things that we would agree on, whether they're moral or immoral, you would find our list wouldn't go beyond 10. Okay, stealing is immoral, right? Lying is immoral. Making fun of people is immoral. Killing is immoral. You could probably go up to 10. But after that, what's going to happen? Then there will be a whole lot of dispute, right? I remember I was going through this training last year, this summer actually, and we were in this training, and of course it was in a context where there were no other Muslims, it was just me, and we were part of a group activity, right? And the idea of morals came up, right? And I was talking about this, and I was saying, listen, when it comes to morals, there are certain things everybody agrees on, and they're crystal clear. There are a whole lot of things that we don't agree on. For example, what is considered moral for a man or a woman who's married in terms of the interaction that they have with the opposite gender? Is it moral for them to joke around and giggle with the opposite gender, right? Is it moral for them to spend time alone with someone from the opposite gender, right? In the context of a friendship, for example? Is it moral for them, for example, to have a great time with someone who is from the opposite gender, who's not their wife or their husband? Different people have different opinions about this, right? When I say different people, I mean like non-Muslims. A lot of different opinions about this. Some people might say, no, that's not the right thing to do, right? That's wrong. Some people say, no, it's fine as long as it doesn't lead to anything. So they have difference of opinions about these issues, right? So if we go to the next slide, slide number 8, this is the one line that I wanted to put, really as a main line to walk away with, that Islamic teachings, they unveil moral values for us. Certain moral values we already know of, but then other moral values are hidden to us. There's a lot of situations where we don't know what is considered moral. That's the role that Islam plays. It will come into the picture and say, listen, if your mother tells you to do something and you don't do it, that is immoral. Now go around in society today and ask them whether that's moral or not. 100 different people have 100 different opinions about that, right? But that's the role that Islam plays. So we don't want to say morality and Islam are the same thing. No, these are two different concepts. But what Islam does is that it unveils moral values for us. It tells us what's moral in the situations that we don't agree on. Okay, so the moment you say you are Muslim, this is the point I want you to remember. The moment you say you're Muslim, you have automatically, and in that split second, have passed judgment on millions of different deeds. You've passed judgment on adultery, that it's bad from a moral perspective. You've passed judgment on backbiting, that it is bad from a moral perspective. You have passed judgment on not giving charity, that it is bad. And you have also passed a judgment on a number of good deeds to have been moral. So the fact that you're Muslim, you're already passing judgment on a whole host of deeds, not characters, on deeds. Okay, so that's number one. If you go back to the slide, That's slide 7. If we go back to slide 7, that's the first point. It's inevitable. You can't be Muslim unless you pass judgment on deeds. Number 2 is that our scholars also say it is obligatory to do that at certain times. Okay, so in particular, Ayatollah Sistani, for example, he says that when you do see someone doing something haram, the first level of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil is actually not to go and speak to that individual. It is not to go and tell that person. The first level is to acknowledge deep down that what this person did was wrong, and to really show that you're not okay with what happened. Okay, now this doesn't apply in every situation. You don't have to do it in every situation. It only applies when you feel like the other person will actually listen to you, which is a lot less than what people normally realize, right? What I always tell people is, hey, if you have a personal relationship with this person or you're close with this person, then try to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. Otherwise, 99% of the time, it's not really going to have too much of an effect, unless you're some great scholar, or those people who are special, of course. So if you go to slide number 9, this is Ayatollah Sistani's ruling. He says, this is from his book Islamic Laws, and the link is right there at the bottom. It says, enjoining good and forbidding evil is carried out at different levels. The first level, which actually comes before you verbally saying anything, is just displaying heartfelt aversion, which happens after you have acknowledged that what they did was morally wrong. Okay, so when it comes to the first meaning of don't judge me, we don't agree with it. It's not only impossible, beyond that, Islam requires me to make a moral judgment on deeds and on actions. And you'll see that I keep emphasizing that over and over again. Okay, moving on from that, now let's talk about the second meaning of don't judge me, which was you can judge my deed, you can judge my action, just don't make a judgment about my character. Let's move on to slide number 10. This is where the real problem comes up. Judging a person's character, that's the main problem. What does Islam say about that? Islam says you are not allowed to make that judgment unless only if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has passed judgment himself. Okay, as a general principle, anytime in Islam you want to pass judgment on a person or a deed, you cannot do that unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has passed judgment before you. If he has passed judgment, then you can pass judgment. But if he hasn't done that, then you cannot do that either. I hope that makes sense. So when it comes to judging people's character, you have to see, where has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us clearly, this person holds no value in my eyes. This person is an evil person. If you come across that from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran and Hadith, Bismillah, can you make that judgment about that same person? Yeah, absolutely. If God has done it and he's told you that this person is evil, then you can also judge that this person is evil, that this person holds no value from God's perspective, right? God doesn't care about this individual, right? Doesn't care, not in the sense that he doesn't love him, he loves him, but his deeds are so horrible that he has now turned into an evil individual. Okay, where do we have this though? Do we have any incident in Quran and Hadith where we are told that such and such individual is so evil he holds no value in my eyes? Do we have that? That's the part where we actually have to figure out. If we go to Quran and Hadith, what we actually realize, and this is in slide 11, so let's move on to the next slide, is that there is only one situation, as far as I have been able to figure out. There is only one situation where you can freely and without any hesitance sit there and say, this person holds no value in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is an evil individual. He will never make it into heaven. Those are heavy judgments, right? Those are big claims. When is that? Surah A'raf, which is Surah number 8, verse 40. Says, the one who denies our signs. I'll read the verse and then inshallah I'll go through, I'll explain. Indeed, those who deny our signs and arrogantly turn away from them, which means what? It means that this person knows the truth, and out of arrogance, he is turning away from it. Not that he doesn't know the truth, which would apply to a lot of people, right? No, this person knows the truth. There's a lot of people who don't know about the truth. He knows the truth. This person, the gates of heaven will not be opened for them, nor shall they enter paradise until the camel passes through the needle's eye. Okay, very beautiful wording from the Quran. Can you have a camel pass through the eye of a needle? No, it's impossible. Right? That's what the Quran is saying. The Quran is using this saying, which they used to use back in the day in Arabic, to explain that this is impossible. The Quran is saying, listen, if you can get a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, this person will also make it into heaven, which means he will never make it into heaven. This person, yes, you can sit there and make a judgment that this person holds no value in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, if he repents, right? But as long as he is in that state, he holds no value in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is fully evil, as we say. Okay? The problem is, how many people have you come across that you can confidently say they fall into this category? Not many people at all. In fact, if you look at the whole world right now, I would argue 99% of people don't even fall under this category, right? 99% of people, some of which do wrong things, right? No, they don't fall under this category. Can you say like Yazid fell under this category? Yes. Can you say the Hitlers of the world probably fall under this category? Trump, all these guys, yeah, they fall under this category, right? But the people you and I are dealing with in our community, do they fall under this category? No, not in a million years. Therefore, outside of this, can I take the actions of a person and judge the character of the individual based on that? No, we don't have that. We don't have that in Quran and Hadith. Where did the Ahlul Bayt sit there and say, this person did this, he's going to end up in heaven or he's going to end up in hellfire, for example? Especially when they were talking about hellfire in the eternal sense of it, right? Where did Quran and Hadith tell us to sit there and judge one another, right? And say, if this person did this or that, that this person holds no value in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When did Imam Hussein teach us that if someone comes and sits in my majlis because they've done wrong things outside of the majlis, which would, by the way, include all of us, where have we been told that you are supposed to sit there and say, no, 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 don't let this person in the majlis? Some of you might have heard the story of this individual, this Turkish individual who used to live in Iran. He's very, very well known. He was essentially a thug, right? And he lived the type of life where he would do things that thugs would do, right? And one night he comes to the majlis of Imam Hussein, right? And he sits in the majlis of Imam Hussein. But before he can actually sit and attend the majlis of Imam Hussein, the person who's at the door essentially tells him to get lost. He says, "You're a thug. What are you coming sitting in the majlis of Imam Hussein? Don't disrespect Imam Hussein by your presence." So they don't let him into the majlis, right? And when they don't let him into the majlis, he goes back home. He has a dream. The person who didn't let him into the majlis has a dream. And Imam Hussein says in that dream to both of them, that are mainly to the guy who didn't let him into the majlis. He tells him, he says, "Why didn't you let my servant into my majlis?" Right? And when he has that dream, he goes back, right? He wakes up, he's crying, right? And he changes his whole life around. So where did Imam Hussein teach us that if someone has done something wrong or they're not practicing Islam outside of the majlis, that they don't hold any value, that you can judge their character? Can you judge deeds? Yes, you can judge deeds. You can say the fact that this person doesn't pray, outside of the majlis is wrong. No problem. The fact that you're Muslim, you've already made that judgment whether you want it or not. But can you judge their character? That's the thing, and that's where the problem comes into mind. So in Islam, when you have a person who knows the truth and turns away from it, this person is an evil person. He holds no value in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Can you make a judgment of someone like that? Yeah, no problem. Right? Can you say Yazid is in hellfire? Yeah, because he falls under this category. Okay. But if someone does not fall under this category, or you're doubtful whether someone falls into this category, which is 99.5% of the people in this world, there's no right, we don't have any right to make judgment on people's character. Let alone, we're not even dealing with this stuff in our communities. You know what we're dealing with in our communities? Is this person, for example, her dress code is done in a certain way. This person, this brother, he's not able to lower his gaze, for example, outside of the majlis. This person, he might lack in terms of his prayer. That one sometimes backbites. This one, these types of issues. And then we sit there and say, no, these guys, they don't matter for God. Okay, well, good luck. Who matters for God? Only you matter for God. Some of us deal with people in that way, right? It's just a huge problem that we have. And nowhere in Quran or Hadith do we have teachings that say that. Okay, so from the second meaning, if you remember, we had three meanings for this phrase of don't judge me. The first meaning, we said we don't agree with it. You are to have a moral opinion about people's deeds. The second one, we agree with, that you can judge people's deeds, you cannot judge their characters, except for these situations, which again, these are situations we don't really deal with. Okay, moving on from that, the third meaning of don't judge me was don't speak to me from a moral high horse. So that's the one that, inshallah, we're going to get to in just a second. Do we agree with that one? Absolutely. In Islam, doesn't matter who you are not to speak to people from a moral high horse. I don't care if you see the angels during the day and God speaks to you during the day. When you speak to other people, you are not to speak to them as one who is perfect and they are just, they are just horrible and God is ashamed of them. You've heard that famous hadith from Prophet Musa, or about Prophet Musa, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, he said, go get somebody and bring somebody to me the next time we want to talk. Go and grab somebody who is not better than you, or that you are better of them. And Musa says that I went around and I kept looking. I said, this person, well, what do I know about this person? What do I know about that person? And the more I went around, I couldn't find anyone until I found the dead body of a dog, right? The dead corpse of a dog. And I looked at it and I said, well, this dog is dead and it stinks, right? And I mean, what value does this hold? And I was going to take this and bring it with me to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then something stopped me. And I said, well, what do I know? Maybe he holds value in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then when he came to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, said, Musa, if you had not come back alone, if you had come back with any other person or thing, you wouldn't have been a prophet anymore. You wouldn't have held that respect in my eyes anymore. This was a test to see how you would judge other people. So we have to be very, very careful that we don't speak to people from a moral high horse. That's a huge problem, unfortunately, that we have. Okay, so these are the three meanings that we have. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. As I'm wrapping up, inshallah, I'll be done, just about 4 or 5 minutes. Just because Islam says that other people are not supposed to judge you and me, if I am struggling with something in my life, if I'm struggling with practicing Islam in my life, just because I'm not supposed to judge others or others aren't supposed to judge me does not mean that I'm supposed to share everything. That's also a problem that we have. And that's something that you find in this society. In this society that we live in, the culture that we live in, right? Because having judgment-free zones is becoming the thing nowadays. What is equivalent in people's minds with a judgment-free zone is that, therefore, I should come and share everything with everybody. No, you're not supposed to do that. If I struggle with a certain habit, maybe I have to share it with a counselor. Maybe I have to share it with someone in particular who can help me with that. There's no problem in that regard. But do I share it with the whole world, right? Do I say, well, I have to get it off my chest, so let me go tell the whole world? No, you're not supposed to go and tell the whole world. That's not necessarily what you're supposed to do. So just because in Islam, people are not supposed to judge you. God doesn't want God doesn't want them to judge you, doesn't mean that then you're supposed to go and share everything. In fact, in Islam, when I struggle with something, I have a wrong habit, for example, I struggle with something, a lot of times sharing it is a sin in and of itself, because what it does is that it normalizes things. When I say sharing it, I mean sharing it with the public. You are to share it, for example, with a trusted individual who can help you with that situation. No problem. You can share it with someone who won't shame you and will help you with that situation. No problem. But am I supposed to share it with thousands of people on social media? Am I supposed to say, well, this is what I struggle with. People are not supposed to judge me. No, you're not supposed to do that. That's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you share it with that one or two individuals who can help you. Okay, that's another point to keep in mind. Moving on to the last slide, that's slide number 11. What should I do if I am being judged? Okay, if I go into a situation, and with this, inshallah, I'll end. If I go into a situation and I feel like people are judging me, or people are already putting me into these stereotypes that they have in their mind, what am I supposed to do? What does Islam tell me that I'm supposed to do in this situation? 2 points. First of all, see how you can be smarter about the situation. If you feel like you walk into a situation and people judge you, then one thing that Islam tells you to do is to do it in a strategic manner. Maybe you do things in a certain manner that doesn't really give people as much ammo. You might say, oh no, Sheikh, I don't want to compromise on who I am, and I have to stay true to myself, and all that. This is not about staying true to yourself. You're not changing the way you live your life. No, you are just portraying certain things so that people have less ammo to come at you with. Is this something that's bad? No, it's not bad at all. It's nothing wrong with this. You're being smart about the situation. You're being strategic about the situation. Right? If I walk into a certain gathering and people see my beard, for example, they see my amama, for example, right? And they say, oh, well, he's a sheikh. So he does things in this way or in that way, right? And he probably lives a very dry life, right? And he doesn't really know what's going on in the world. The only thing he does is he has books around him, right? I have a bunch of books here, right? He has books around him, right? And that's all he does. He just reads books all day. And he doesn't care really what's going on in the world. Okay. What am I supposed to do? Can I be smart about the situation, right? And explain, hey, by the way, I know what's going on, right? By the way, my life isn't so dry. Actually, my life might be more fun than yours, right? You don't know. Am I supposed to try to be smart about it? You walk into a gathering, right? Your relatives judge you. You walk into the masjid, people judge you. Can you be smarter about it? Now, what they do is wrong. There's no doubt about that. What they're doing is wrong. We already talked about that, right? We talked about that last 40 minutes. What they're doing is wrong. But can you be smarter about it? Yes, you can. A lot of times you can be smarter about it. Why give people ammo to come at you? Why not portray or explain to them certain aspects of your character that will remove that judgment from them? That's an important thing to do. So that's the first thing. Second thing is a very, very beautiful conversation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had with Prophet Musa. And that is built on this idea that whenever you feel judged in this world, you have to remember everyone feels judged at one point or another. Everyone is judged. Now, some people a whole lot more than others. There's no doubt about that. Okay. But at the end of the day, everyone is going to be judged in their life at one point or another. So what is this conversation that Musa had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Musa one day, he was speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, Ya Allah, I need you to do me a favor. That favor is this. People behind my back when I'm not around, even sometimes in my presence, they do them of me. They speak badly of me. They say terrible things about me. They judge me. Right? They attribute things to me that is not really part of who I am. If you could please do something so that you could stop them from saying these terrible things about me. You could stop them from judging me, right? From saying horrible things about me. That would be wonderful. Okay. What do you think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to him with? He said, Musa, I will not do that for you because I have not even done that for myself. I am God and people judge me. I am God and there are people who say horrible things about me. I am God and there are people who say negative things about me. You are my servant. You're not 1/1,000,000th of as good as I am. And you're complaining about being judged. I'm God. And people judge me, right? And if you think about it, that is so true. When this pandemic happened, right, for many of us who, by the way, weren't like our life didn't change that dramatically, right? Like it's not like not all of us lost a loved one. Not all of us had to go to a hospital and could barely breathe, right? For those, if those people, their lives changed dramatically. Not all of us lost our jobs. For those people, life changed dramatically. So this is not about that. But for other ones of ours that we went through a little bit of difficulty, what did we do? We judged God, right? We're like, what is he trying to ruin our life, right? That's what he's trying to do, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Musa, he said, Musa, I will not do that for you because I'm God and people judge me. What are you expecting me to do something for you that I have not done even for myself? And then Musa responded, he said, Ya Allah, now that I know even you have to deal with this, people say negative and terrible things even about you, I would be rather happier to walk in your footsteps. I would rather want to be like you than to be different from you. So let them judge me, let them say terrible things about me as much as they want. With that, inshallah, we'll bring the topic to an end.
All right, thank you so much, Sheikh. This was really informative. Like all parts of it were very interesting. I'm sure that the community itself took advantage of this. The ending was very strong. Like I personally, I felt that at the end. It was very strong. So thank you so much for your time. This is just a message to all the people watching. The program is not complete yet. We'd recommend you all to ask questions on the Slido. The link is provided on the YouTube live stream, so you can ask any questions you like. Your information can be private, like you don't have to display your name or anything, and I'll be asking the questions to the Sheikh. So again, the link is on the Slido. The code is 786110. You guys can ask questions. So we'll be starting off with the questions, Sheikh. There are a few questions already. Just give me a second.
Sure.
Okay, so question number one, how do I deal with judgment from people at work? Do I present myself as a modern Muslim, or should I tell people my actual views that may be deemed extreme?
Going back to the first point that we were making on the last slide, right? You have to be smart about it and you have to be strategic about it. And this doesn't mean compromising your belief system, right? So I'll give you an idea about this, right? When the Muslims went and they migrated to Habasha, right? To Abyssinia, or today's Ethiopia, and they were speaking to the king, right? Who the African king that we know as Najashi, for example.
Mhm.
There were so many different beliefs that the Muslims had at that point. One of the beliefs was the idea that the Christians say, Jesus is the Son of God, is not only wrong, it is equal to disbelief, right? It is literally shirk. Okay, so from that perspective, the Muslims, didn't agree with this fundamental belief that the Christians had. But when Ja'far ibn Abi Talib was asked about the beliefs of the Muslims, what did he bring up? Did he stand there in front of Najashi and say, listen, by the way, that thing that you believe in, like we don't care about it at all. Like it's completely wrong. That's not what he said, right? He was very strategic about it. He said, a prophet has come to us. He tells us not to steal, not to drink, right? Not to attack others, right? Adultery is not allowed for us. And that king was, he was blown away. And then he said, okay, well, read from the verses that you have. What did he do? Did he choose, in Allah, like whoever says Jesus is the third of the three is kafir? No, he didn't choose those verses, right? What verses did he choose? Of course, maybe those verses weren't even revealed, but there were many verses of the Quran that would negate the Christian belief at that time. What verses did he reveal? He chose the verses from Surah Maryam, right? Of that, divine moments where Maryam is given Isa alayhi salam. So I would say be strategic about it. If there are certain beliefs that you feel like a person may not be able to comprehend and digest, no, there's no need for you to go there. And you also don't have to say the opposite of it, right? You don't have to sit there and say, I don't believe in this. No, you just don't go there, right?
Yeah.
Like we have from Hadith, everything you say has to be true, but everything that is true is not to be said.
For sure. All right. Thank you so much. So, second question, is it possible to help someone become a better Muslim while not judging them for the haram actions?
Yeah, like I said, you can judge their deeds, and when you say, I want to make them a better Muslim, you've already made that judgment, and there's no problem in making that judgment. If you're a
Okay.
Muslim, you've already made that judgment. But as long as you don't make a judgment on their character, when you see them struggling with certain things, don't approach them from the perspective of, I'm better, let me help you out. No,
Yeah.
approach them from the perspective of, I need help, you need help, I'll help you, maybe you help me one day. So it's just a matter of mindset and how we go about it. Um, it's a serious issue that we have, unfortunately. But
For
I will
sure.
tell you, if you do it in the right way with the right tone, people over time will pick up on this. Sometimes initially, people will judge you and think that you are judging them, as odd as it sounds, right? It's
Mhm.
judgment in judgment. They will, like, you say something, they're like, don't judge me, whereas you
Yeah.
weren't even judging them, right? So initially that might happen, but if you give it time and you have more interactions with the person, then the person over time will really see how genuine you are in your tone and that you're not speaking to them from a moral high horse. Then that problem will be solved, inshallah.
Inshallah. All right. So the third question is, some actions are not inherently haram, but looked down upon from our communities. An
Mhm.
example of this is having a tattoo. So how do we deal with this?
Well, what I would say is, here's the thing. There are certain things that of course, we have a difference between culture and Islam. There's no doubt about that, right? Everyone
Mhm.
knows that. And every culture has certain things that it emphasizes that Islam doesn't necessarily emphasize. I come from an Iranian background, and we have a whole bunch of things that we really, really emphasize that Islam doesn't necessarily emphasize, right? Or certain things that are valuable for us that Islam does not deem valuable. So every culture has that. But what I would say is that if something is frowned upon in your culture, okay, and Islam doesn't have a problem with it, if someone else is doing it, you also should not frown upon it. Okay, so like if someone else does it, should I sit there and say, oh, what a horrible thing you did? Well, no, because Islam does not say this is haram. But should you do it? No, I don't think you should do it either, right? Unless it's something that's really, really necessary, right? Unless it's something that is, you don't do it, it will ruin your life. For example, someone might say, like, for example, in certain cultures, not going by what your parents say is, of course, deemed like, it's of course in Islam it's wajib, but it's only wajib when it's not going to ruin your life, right?
Yeah.
Now, if I'm horrible at being a sheikh, right? If my dad says, no, I want you to be a sheikh, right? Well, I can't go based on that. It's going to ruin my whole future, right? So in those situations, okay, that's a situation where it's frowned upon in my culture, although Islam allows it. But because it's going to ruin my life, well, I won't do it, and I'll choose my own career, right?
Yeah.
But then there are other times, like a tattoo, for example. Why create a problem? It's not wajib to have a tattoo. Why you're killing yourself to have a tattoo, right? And this is just an example, of course, right? Other things, people like, no, I want to break this culture. Don't worry about breaking the culture, right? You live your life and you do your thing. When it's necessary, there are some times where it will be necessary. Then you will naturally break the culture at those times. I'm young, for example, right? Let's say someone is young in their culture, right? And they feel like they need to get married. And it might be frowned upon in the culture, or people may not take them seriously. Okay, but this is something that they feel like it's important for them to happen right now. Okay, so they do it, and naturally they essentially break some stereotypes. They break, certain aspects of the culture naturally. So I don't think it's a good idea to be a rebel and try to go against your culture. No, Islam hasn't necessarily recommended that. But when there are times where Islam says you have to do something, then you have to be up to the challenge, or up for the challenge.
All right, perfect. Next question. Where's the line of advising someone on how to do proper hijab? If we're told not to judge how someone wears hijab, how do we address this?
Okay, so I have a lot of, this is something that is, it's a very sensitive topic. And I say this because in Iranian families, including my own family, extended relatives, this is a very sensitive topic. What I will say is what I said in the presentation, that the greater the issue or the more sensitive the issue, the deeper of a personal relationship you have to have with that individual. Okay. So and this is a sensitive issue. So if I want to bring this up with somebody, I better have a really, really close friendship with them. Okay. If I don't have that, I'm just being honest, it's not going to work. Not this issue in particular. I'm not even talking about this issue in particular, any sensitive issue, right? If I bring it up with them, if I don't have a personal relationship with them, unfortunately, it's not gonna work out. And hey, if you have a friend who's doing this, not this, anything, right? They're doing something wrong. Just because you don't bring it up to them doesn't mean you also condone it at the same time. No, you don't have to give your opinion all the times. So what I would say is that with any sensitive issue, the more sensitive the issue, the deeper your personal connection has to be. Otherwise, what I would say is that it's not really going to hold and bear any fruits at the end of the day.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. How can we discuss the idea of not judging people in our community with our older generation? Some are ignorant, but is it not important to discuss this?
So I would say that, of course, it's important to discuss it. I mean, I'll share this with you, that what we're doing as a presentation here today, and the brother who contacted me initially to do this topic, I told him as well that this is a topic that I actually did. I presented this as a lecture on the 9th of Muharram. I believe it was last year, if I'm not mistaken. In other words, it's an issue that, at least as it relates to here in Dallas, City of Knowledge here in Dallas, we've been trying to bring to the forefront of the discussion, because I've seen how much it holds back our youth
For sure.
from being a part of the work you're doing. You and I say this as someone who's has the responsibility of being a resident alim. You want to care for the younger generation, and when I say younger generation, I'm a part of that generation. I'm not too old myself. I remember I was talking in Sunday school once, right? And I was like, yeah, these millennials are like this and like that. And then the kids were like, shit, you're a millennial. So, which is, I think it's true. Um, because these categorizations are very blurry, but
Yes,
I assume it would fall into that category. But anyways, so when I say the younger generation, I'm saying even myself, right? It holds us back so much from being a part of great things that are happening that I could really benefit from. So, as it relates to our own community, we've been trying really hard. The night of Muharram is not a normal night. It's like the second most important night of the whole year, right? Or third, whatever you want to call
for
it,
sure.
right? But that's why I chose this night for this topic, right? And it was very much appreciated because it's something that has to turn into a culture. Now, as it relates to our elders, do you have to rush with them? No, you just have to be patient, just like any other issue, right? It's part of the culture. It's part of the culture that we have, that from the cultures that we come from, most of us at least. And you just have to be patient with it. Sometimes some elders are a little bit more open-minded, so you can discuss these with them directly. Some of them are not as open-minded, so you just have to learn to live with that.
Yeah. Okay. Next question is a very good question in my opinion. The question is: the whole hashtag Me Too movement led to people posting about their experiences. Does this still fall under the "not everything should be shared" concept, or no?
I won't give my opinion in particular about that situation because that's coming from a perspective of, it's initiated uh, it was initiated in from a non-Muslim perspective. Now there might be Muslims who are taking part in it as well now, but initially, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The founders. So it's coming from a different perspective, right? But as it relates to ourselves, right? What I will say is this: like, for example, if I have, let's say, a brother struggles with lowering their gaze, okay?
Okay.
Is that something they're supposed to go out and share with everybody? No, they struggle with other habits that I don't want to go into detail. Is that something that they're supposed to go out and share with others?
No.
No, that's something between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you have to share it with a counselor, then, of course, you would definitely do that. If you have to share it with, if it's a particular issue where you feel like an alim that is trusted and understands your situation, then you can share it with them, of course. But as a general principle, just because I'm struggling with something and just because people are not supposed to judge me doesn't mean I'm supposed to go out and put everything out there. So I won't give my opinion about that particular issue because it's completely different. There are so many social political dimensions to that particular issue. But as it relates to us internally, a lot of the issues that we deal with, it's not for me to go and share and be proud about it. If I'm struggling, for example, with the way I dress, right? Does that mean that I should be proud about it and go put it out there that, yeah, like this is how I dress, and just you guys just be cool with it? No, that's not something that Islam wants from you either. Islam also doesn't want people to judge you and say because you're struggling with this aspect of implementing Islamic rulings that you are a bad person. Islam doesn't want that either.
Okay. Okay. The next question is: at times when giving advice, it feels like I'm coming off as pretentious or coming from a moral high horse. What can I do to prevent that?
Um, Emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, I think is what they call it. Reading the person that you are talking to. This
Okay.
is such a critical thing. I cannot stress this enough. When you're speaking to somebody, you have to see how they're reacting to what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
And if you see them reacting in a way, right, or coming back to you with a response that shows you they're hurt, then obviously you have to go back and you have to use a softer tone, right? And you have to use a tone that is more genuine, or you have to explain to them where you're coming from. That's one side of it. So just being careful the words that you choose, right? This we read in the verses of the Quran that Musa was told to go to Fir'aun, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, فَقُولَ لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا, that when the two of you brothers go and speak to Fir'aun, you need to speak to him in a soft manner. Right? Layyin means soft. That's Fir'aun. Now you compare that to us brothers and sisters. Now you tell me if we speak to each other in a soft, in a soft tone. I don't think so.
Yeah.
But and I've seen this so much, it blows my mind. That's why I said this topic is so near and dear to my heart, because it blows my mind how many times I sometimes I've been in, I'm going off topic, but sometimes I've been in like a group of two or three, and I can just see the facial reaction that someone is having to what another person in the group is saying. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, don't you see the way they're reacting? Like, it's just so obvious that what you're saying is going to create a huge reaction from them. So being emotionally aware of how people are reacting to what you're saying is a big thing. And then other than that, the second part of it is how much are you striving? How much are you working hard, really, to act upon those same teachings that you're telling other people to do? How much knowledge do you have about this? Yesterday I was going through a hadith I was going through this hadith book because I was looking up a hadith, and it's very beautiful. In this book, Mizan al-Hikmah, it was talking about this. The Imam says, don't enjoin the good and forbid the evil before you know what is good and what is evil, before you know exactly what the rulings are, because you will not be able to enjoin the good and forbid the evil if you don't have knowledge. You
For
know how
sure,
many people
yeah.
speak without knowledge?
A lot,
That's another problem that we have.
unfortunately. All right. Okay. So I believe this is our last question for today. If anyone has more questions, please feel free to add them. This question is, can you discuss briefly what constitutes as ghiba, and in what condition is it permissible?
The ghaiba has a couple. Well, it has like 4 or 5 different conditions, but the main ones are these. First of all, it's something that is going to bother the person that you're talking about. It's a negative. It's a flaw that you are talking about. That's the first and most important thing. Second thing is that essentially it is not something that's already out there in the open. The person that you're talking to about this flaw does not have information of that flaw. That's the second condition. Third condition is that you both know who you're talking about, right? If I talk about someone and nobody knows who I'm talking about, then that's not ghaiba. These are like 3 or 4 of the main conditions, and it has some other conditions as well. When is it allowed? The main place where it is allowed, and there are some slight differences between Ayatollah Sistani and Ayatollah Khamenei's ruling in this regard,
Okay.
but one of those places where it's allowed is when someone is wronged and injustice has been done to them. Some of our scholars say you can share who has done this to you if it's going to help you to get your rights back. Some of them say regardless you can share it. That's one situation where it's allowed. The second situation where it's allowed, where I think most of us actually deal with, is whenever it is necessary because there is a greater issue at risk. Right. So, for example, this person might be at a risk of hurting themselves. This person, or people are getting married, and I know that they come to me and they need to consult me. They're going to be doing business with one another, and so they need my opinion on this topic. Anytime that is absolutely crucial. There's something going on in the school. I have to tell the principal because he's the one who has authority, who can solve this issue, right? Or can stop this person from doing what he's doing. There has been, something of the nature of, I'll just give this example, for example. There has been an assault, right? Physical assault on someone, sexual assault on someone, right? Am I supposed to go and share this, with other people? That's a separate thing. But can I share this with the person who has authority that can stop it? Well, then yes,
For sure,
you
yeah.
share it with the person who has authority and can stop this from happening. I use that example because it's something that we are dealing with more and more, and I've had multiple questions, people asking me about that. But then again, we have to be sure about what we say as well. We have to be sure about what we say as well. We have to be careful about what we say. But yes, if it's going to stop somebody, it's not going to be ghaibat if I go and share it with the person who I feel can help with that situation.
Okay. Perfect. All right. We got one more question. Muta is something that is considered taboo. This
Mhm.
causes our younger youth to commit haram rather than doing muta. How do we address this issue?
It's an issue that unfortunately has had a lot of. It's been misused so much at this point, unfortunately, that and it leads to problems. We're not gonna lie. I can't lie about that. It's led to a lot of problems. And that is why you find that even some of our great scholars, Ayatollah Khamenei, for example, have mentioned in some of their advice that, this is something that, if it's, even certain things that might be considered halal in our religion, you have to take your situation and your lifestyle into consideration. So, for example, this Ayatollah Khamenei gave an opinion about this a while ago, as it relates to, the issue of polygamy, for example, right? It was very interesting, the perspective that he had on that topic, where essentially he was saying, you have to understand that, is this something that is permissible in Islam under certain conditions, with certain conditions fulfilled? And I always, I always tell people, I say those conditions are conditions that the people I know, like no one that I've ever come across fulfills those conditions. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
It's pretty rare for me to ever see someone who has those conditions.
Yeah.
But is it allowed in certain conditions? Yes, it's allowed in certain conditions. But the reality is you have to take your time and place into consideration. And it's interesting because in that, it was a memo that his office sent out. And he said that most times nowadays it will create problems. So what are you trying to do? And essentially he was discouraging it. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. And this issue that you brought up is of this type, really. The one situation that I think is a place where it can help and be beneficial is with supervision, the supervision of elders, if people want to get to know each other, right, for a limited period of time with certain conditions again, then that's something that would be a place for this type of legislation to be used. But unfortunately, it's been used in so many wrong ways at this point that, of course, we've heard about how it has been misused. So, and that's part of the reason why people are so sensitive about it, because in reality, it has been misused a whole lot. That's a reality, of the situation. So that's what I would say in that regard. It's just like the topic of judgment, like when you're judged on certain things, how do you go about it? You just have to, be patient and try your best to maneuver the situation.
For sure. All right. With that, I think that's all the questions we have. The last is a statement. It's not a question, but thank you for your time and efforts. I greatly enjoyed the presentation and delivery. So,
Thank you.
yeah, so thank you so much, Sheikh. That basically wraps up our program. We'd like to thank you for taking out your time. And inshallah, we hope to see you with us in the future as well, have more programs with this, hopefully. We'd like to thank the audience as well for taking out your time and attending. I just had to present to you a few reminders that this Tuesday we're having a panel discussion about abolishing racial injustice. So we're going to have Sayyid Asad Jafri, Sheikh Osama Abdul Ghani, and Sheikh Hussein Makki. So we'd advise you all to tune in this Tuesday. Other than that, follow our social media for other sorts of events we are continuing to do. Check out our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and stay tuned. With that being said, I'd like to thank our technical team, Azar Mazar, of course, his hard work and persistence. And again, a big thank you to you, Sheikh. This was very informative, and I think the community really benefited from having you here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.